Welcome, everybody. We are here for the next full official episode of our series exploring philosophical liberalism. And this one, it's a good one, a juicy one, because we are diving deep into the question of what is philosophy. And Chris and I are both going to take a stab at this as non professional philosophers, but as I want to say proudly intellectual actors and entrepreneurs, people who think deeply and recognize the importance of that. So, we're going to give an exploration of this idea and importantly connect it to liberalism and why it matters for, I'm going to say, why it matters for liberalism broadly and why it matters for our specific vision, why we're calling what we're doing philosophical liberalism with a capital P and a capital L. But let's start with Chris, because I know you put together what I think is going to be a really interesting framework to answer the question of what is philosophy.
Sure. Thanks, Joia. And I'm excited to dive into this one. Yeah. So, as those of you who have started to listen to us know, we're all about kind of taking a first principles approach. And so, to me, definitions are foundational to taking a first principles approach, defining what you mean and being clear about it so that you can then strip it to its essentials and then build something new. So when I was even just thinking about this question myself and trying to answer it from a first principles perspective, I actually liked how I liked the mental model and framework we used in our prior episode to answer the question of what is philosophical liberalism, our creed. We used the five W's plus how, as I call it, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. Did I get all five of the W's? Who, what, when, where, why, and how? Yeah. I found that really helpful because as I was even trying to define it for myself, I realized there were key aspects of the definition that touched on each of those. And so, and a mental model, for those who aren't familiar with even that term, it's just a heuristic or a shorthand, shortcut kind of um, framework and conceptual framing of difficult, complex topics or abstractions to make it easier to analyze and break them down. So with that, I'll go through kind of the five W's and how that I came up with for it, starting with the what, because to me, that's your real definition. What is the essence of something? So that's even the most first principle part of even the five W's how framework. And my answer on the what is that it was actually three parts. So the first part is that philosophy is the most foundational or fundamental branch of human knowledge. And so by that meaning, as human beings, we are rational beings with a brain, our reasoning mind, that is our primary tool of survival. We have to think and gain knowledge about the world around us in order to act and survive, to support our lives. And we do that by gaining knowledge about the world. Well, philosophy is the first and foremost, most important branch of knowledge on which all other knowledge depends, because philosophy asks the most fundamental and wide-reaching, what I call meta level questions about what is the nature of the universe, what is reality, what is man, and what are human beings and our place in the universe? How do we know all of this? Kind of those widest ranging questions without which you really can't answer or learn about any other part of the world around us, science, mathematics, etc. Those all kind of derive from first having some semblance of an answer, or at least a theory on each of those other foundational questions. So to me, it's the foundational branch of human knowledge upon which all others depend. And then the second part of the what is it is a guide for living, because like I said, we need to use our brains to survive, but we are not given an automatic rule book on how to survive. So we have to figure it out through trial and error and through gaining knowledge, through observing the world around us and making sense of it and deducing and inducing principles from that. So philosophy is the way in which we can organize and structure that process to make sense of it and then ultimately to apply it to our life. And then the third part of this is it's not only a guide for life in a general sense, but it's your guide for your life. And by what I mean by that is philosophy, because it asks these wide-ranging questions from which you can construct a view of the world and your place in it, which also includes it's your way of answering what is important to you, what do you value, what do you want out of your life, what does happiness for you look like, and how are you going to go about achieving that. Philosophy is where you ask and answer all of those questions, and then um, allows you to take action that is in sync and in harmony with that. So it's the vehicle through which you can marry your ideals with your actions and hopefully achieve the happiness that's possible in your life. So that's the three part of the what, the how, and then moving on to the how, which I think Joy, even in our last episode, you mentioned that you often see the what and the how, they're a little bit hard to disentangle and they go together. I definitely agree with that, and think that especially applies here on the question of what is philosophy. That to me, the what and the how are kind of two parts of the same foundational definition. So the how here is that philosophy is a process. It's a method of thinking, both about these questions that philosophy concerns itself with. What is the nature of the universe, mankind, his place in it? And just a method of thinking more broadly about any problem or question you face. So, and to me, that method is defined by kind of at least five essential criteria or characteristics that I kind of came up with. And those five are it's a method of curiosity, first and foremost, that you're always asking questions. It's a method that is critical, meaning it self questions both its own answers and theories, and just critically evaluates whatever other answers or knowledge others give to you out in the world. It's really evaluating, does this make sense? Does this fit in with everything else I know? Is it logical and non-contradictory? Things like that. It is comprehensive, so that means that you are fitting whatever piece of knowledge you are chewing on and trying to discover, you're fitting it into the wider framework of other knowledge you have. It is what are those? Those are three. It's lot based on logic. So there is a system of how you identify what is true and what is false. This is key because, I definitely want to advocate that, I don't think philosophy just means everybody makes up whatever they want and lives in their own, view of reality. Like part of being philosophical and the point about the how being equally as important is that there is a method for you to get to better answers as you ask these questions. And this is part of the how. And then lastly, it is, wait, that's four. What is the fifth one? Oh, it's
I'm impressed that you're doing with this without notes
yeah, well,
because I would not be able to hold all
I
five.
I have it here, so I did write most of this down. Um, it is and it's consistent. So meaning if you find something's true in one area of knowledge, it can't then not be true in another area, that you kind of apply the rule of kind of non-contradiction, so to say. So that's the what and the how, and those are the meatiest parts, so the rest won't be as long. But those, and then the why, then I move to the why, which to me in hierarchy is probably the next most important of the six planks. And the why, or the what for, why does this matter? It kind of ties back to that third aspect of my what definition, which is it's your guide to your life, that through philosophy and through determining your values and trying to act on them and realize them, that is your first step to hopefully achieving happiness. That the more you harmonize what it is you believe is true and valuable to you, and then the action you take, the less you will be in conflict, and reducing your own inner conflict, or confusion about your own life and what you want and just about the world. That is, I think, one of the key sources of happiness. So, and then from there, we can really get to a point of flourishing and even greatness when, as human beings, we're both moving in a direction in harmony with our values and ideals, and we're able to focus on higher order concerns, potentialities, creativity, all of the things that make human, in kind of the Maslow's hierarchy, kind of reach those higher levels. So that's the why. And then for the other three, the who, when, and where, it's a very simple answer. It's everybody, always, and everywhere. That's my answer. So with that, I'll just pause and I guess see what you have to say about that, Joya.
Well, you know that I love that you took this incredibly thorny, detailed topic and brought it all into your own words, into your own rubric and system and framework, because that's so essential to what I think philosophy is. So, when I thought about how to answer this question, partly I want to even draw on some other existing sources to give the answer. And I think that's what we're kind of going to go into next. But if I had to summarize what my approach to philosophy is, I would say that philosophy is your answer to the big questions of life in both your thought, but even more importantly, in your action. The way I see it, philosophy is organic. It is something that ought to be ever developing, as you, as a human being, ought to be ever developing. I do believe that if you're not growing, you're dying. And so as you grow, your philosophy ought to be growing, developing along with you. And that philosophy is something that is individual to you within a social context of learning from others. And I think that's even exactly what we're going to demonstrate in this next part by looking to others and what others have said about philosophy, and then drawing some of our own ideas out of what that is. So anything that you have to say there, or we can maybe start diving into some of these additional resources on what is philosophy.
Yeah, I do. Yours was much more succinct than mine, so I appreciate that.
Well, because
Uh,
mine is going to be much longer. We know that
yeah,
I'm not going to
sure.
be that
No,
brief and just leave it there. But
that's
anything
no,
else?
that's great. We've talked about this a little bit offline, but I think especially since you're grounding your kind of essence of this question into one of these points, which is that it's kind of personal to each person. I just would love if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that, and then maybe even to uh, harmonize or contrapose it, depending on your view, with kind of what I was saying about kind of a method of thinking and kind of um, applying rigorous method to figuring out each individual's philosophy.
Well, I do think that is one of the interesting things about philosophy, because well, so in a sense, when we say what are the big questions of life, perhaps the big question is, what is truth? And in essence, I do believe that there is truth that is out there, but I guess my own personal philosophy is that everyone gets to that truth by their own path. And in that way, I do believe everyone carves out their own philosophy. So even though I do think that there are correct ideas or correct philosophical ideas, we're going to be putting forward a view of philosophical liberalism and grounding liberalism in certain philosophical ideas that I think at this point you and I agree are the correct ideas based on our experience of life on earth. And that I do think there is a method. I think you and I would agree that it's essentially what's known as the scientific method, is part and parcel with some of the truth, right? And the way that the what and the how are ultimately combined. That what
Mhm.
the truth is through this method of the
Hmm.
scientific method, and that is in a sense generalizable to all people. But interestingly, even like the way the scientific method works is that every person is going to be coming at it with their own questions. They're going to be coming at it with their own background and life stories. So in that sense, I do think that everybody, while they're on a path toward, let's call it capital T truth, that path is going to always be individual and unique. And even, two identical twins are going to take their own journey. And in that sense, and we're going to see that I'm going to agree with one philosopher who says that philosophy is an activity. And I think each person in that sense is involved in their own activity, and in that way develops their own philosophy.
Thank you. That does clarify. So why don't we then use that as a great jumping off point to some of those other resources that you referenced, maybe even the piece that you just referenced?
Yeah. Well, so even let's just start with some of the general resources. So when we first had this discussion, so I will say, so my first thought when I said, well, we're going to be answering what is philosophy, I thought, well, maybe we'll look to Wikipedia and see what is the Wikipedia entry, and even Wikipedia, with I think what we know is some of its issues with perhaps being biased on certain topics, especially controversial topics, and philosophy perhaps is the most controversial fundamental topic of them all. I thought actually had a pretty decent summary,
Yeah,
to,
I
if no one
agree.
had ever asked this question, to give us just sort of a broad overview of what philosophy is. But then I also realized that this question of looking at Wikipedia is so like 2010s, and this is 2025 when we are recording this. And, we have the advantage of being able to use AI tools that are getting better and better every day. And so I feel like, we're recording this in the moment, and our goals with this series, I know, are to be both timeless and timely. So this is
Mhm.
one of the aspects where I think we are actually going to be very timely, because I wanted to bring in so I ended up asking Claude, Anthropic's current AI, Claude. And I feel like anybody who's going to be watching this like 20 years from now is going to be like, oh my God, like the way that we think about like what the internet was like in the 90s or something,
Yep, exactly.
But
That's the
that said,
timeless part of this.
right, well, yeah, but interestingly, I thought Claude actually gave me a pretty good nutshell response to the question of what is philosophy. And so that
Hmm.
so I explained to Claude that I was going to be giving this presentation on a podcast, and that I wanted to know what is philosophy. And so first Claude gave me its description of what philosophy is, and then it also gave me a way that I could present it on the podcast. So I'm going to read both of those to you. So here's what
Oh,
Claude told me.
interesting. Okay.
So, Claude told me that philosophy is the systematic investigation of fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. It is characterized by critical thinking, logical argumentation, and critical analysis of concepts and assumptions we might otherwise take for granted. Which, as a starting off
That's
point,
pretty good.
was
Yeah,
pretty good. Yep.
I like
And
it.
then this was the way that Claude told me that I ought to be presenting this to all of you people.
Okay, we're getting behind the
It,
scenes for both
yes,
of them. How
yes.
AI works.
How AI works, and maybe this is even the point to mention where I think this is going to be something that Chris and I are going to be experimenting with, as we go through this series. Just ways of augmenting our own intelligence with these tools, to the extent that they're available now.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're obviously doing it both in our respective entrepreneurial endeavors, and
Mhm.
this is another way in which we're trying to bring that entrepreneurial approach to political and intellectual activism and our work here as well.
Mhm. So here's Claude's response of how I should open up this presentation on what is philosophy. Claude tells me, philosophy is our attempt to answer humanity's most basic and profound questions. What can we truly know? What makes an action right or wrong? What is the nature of reality itself? But philosophy isn't just about asking big questions. It's about um, sorry, about how we approach these questions using reason and logic, to examine our deepest assumptions and build rigorous arguments for what we believe. A philosopher is like a detective of ideas, constantly asking why and how do we know, until we reach the bedrock of our understanding.
I like that too, and I especially like that you took an AI output and put it onto a piece of paper.
Onto paper, exactly.
I mean, for the record, I think as you know, I still take lots copious handwritten notes. So, there this is part of technology, right? That it's augmenting our abilities, but we do still engage with our fundamental physical nature. So,
Well,
yeah,
2 points on that. So one, and I think there was a lot of evidence to suggest that just from our nature as human beings, the hand-mind, hand-brain connection is so strong that there is nothing that, at least until maybe we start putting these devices into our bodies, that there is just something about writing something out by hand. And just a quick aside here, it's something that I even think about as a mother. I have a young toddler, and there's lots of thought now that, well, today's young children will never have to learn how to write. And it's probably true. I mean, everything now is typing, and there's so much you can do even just with voice commands, and that's only going to
voice.
be
Yeah, I was
more
gonna
and more
say.
so. And pretty soon we probably are going to be having these devices in our bodies, and like like, does, a child born today really need to learn how to write? And I'm so emphatic in thinking, well, when my son is old enough, not only is he going to learn printing, he's going to learn cursive, because you'll notice if we look at this that I also wrote it in cursive. From the point that cursive is still even the most facile, the easiest way to, when you're actually handwriting something out, to be able to have that ability. And so it's just a still, part of our human nature still, until that changes, that I don't think that the technology has yet changed, and something to use and take advantage of. And this is also partly because my
Well
printer was
said.
broken, and so I would have otherwise printed.
There's always a second
Well,
second
the
story
response,
here
but well, not
underneath.
broken, but it's essentially packed away, so it's not within use. Because if you can sort of even tell from my blurred background that we're doing a lot of renovations in our home right now, so I was not able to use my printer, and so it was short enough. I'm like, yes, but it was the combination of
That's all
I
right.
would be
As
able
we
to.
set off as we set offline, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Mexico City with my husband on the bed behind me. You can't really see him though for the audience, so you won't
I
get to
still
see
think
him
he
this
should make an
time, but
appearance. It'll
probably at
probably be
some
the best part of
point.
the whole video if he did.
Exactly, yes. So back to Claude and that
So back to Claude.
beautiful poetry that he or she or it wrote
Well, Claude, so I
for
guess it's
us,
a
you
he.
know.
I think Claude's a masculine name, right?
Right.
So we'll call him a him.
Well, it's funny because couldn't
Claudette, right?
Claude go both
Claudia, or if
ways?
it's more of a feminine name. I think of Claude as being masculine.
Yeah.
We'll call it a him.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I see the because it has an E at the end. That's how it's spelled, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to the isn't the E ending a word in with an E in French like a feminizing of the word usually?
I guess I always thought of Claude
Or am
as
I
being a
totally
masculine
making
name.
that up?
Is this
Any
a
French
moment for
list
2025 that we have to think about what are the pronouns for AI now?
I
Like,
seriously, it's
yes,
bad.
AI
You
has to
know,
introduce
anyone who's
itself and
French
tell
out
us
there is
what is its
probably going to be
pronouns.
really mad at me because I probably just totally effed up their, their whole conjugation and punctuation. So, but back to Claude in that presentation, I guess anything you wanted to, I thought it was great. It was a poetic and certainly more succinct kind
Mhm.
of framing of what it kind of, I think, captured essentially the parts that we both kind of came up with on our own. So, but anything else you wanted to kind of pull out from that of significance?
Well, one of the interesting things was that it really did seem to emphasize the focus on, well, what we know as the branch of philosophy that is epistemology, that it really drew that out, the importance of thinking, that it drew out the ideas of knowledge and reason and mind and language and critical thinking, logical argumentation, questioning assumptions, the whole metaphor of summing it up as a detective of ideas. That was the
Mm,
part that it really
mm-hmm.
emphasized. Like, it didn't go to ethics, it didn't even mention the concept of virtue. It talked about
Interesting.
value. It
Yep.
asked us what makes an action right or wrong, but it didn't even we get to some of those questions of character. It didn't get to political philosophy yet, although obviously
Sure.
it's building on that. But
Which is what
I
our,
thought it
right.
was
Yeah.
interesting and significant that it focused mainly on epistemology. And then I actually thought that was a nice tie-in to the next resource that I wanted to share, which comes out of a philosophy textbook. The author of that textbook, I believe his name is Philip Pecorino. And again, I'm going to put the notes here in our show notes so that you can follow. This is even, you can find the PDF of this online. And so this is more of an academic presentation, but one still designed, I believe, for undergraduates. And so really kind of giving um, essentially a broad-based answer to the question. And the way this author framed it was, just what is philosophy anyway? So this
Mm,
academic was trying to answer, just what is philosophy anyway? And what I really liked about that particular piece was, again, this emphasis on, well, here he emphasized the activity of thought. And one of the first things to note is that he really emphasized first this idea that philosophy is an activity, that it's a pursuit, that a
mm-hmm.
philosophy isn't just something that you have, that philosophy is something
Right.
that you do, and that specifically what the doing is a specific way of thinking. Like you point out, Chris, even like you really emphasize the method of thinking, which we've kind of talked about is core to what philosophy is. And then I really liked that approach. And then another thing I also really liked about his piece was when he got into some of the specifics about what kind of thinking is the activity of thought that is philosophy. He really had, what you and I know both really appreciate, a kind of both and approach. He talked
Mm,
specifically about the activity of thought as being both critical and comprehensive, of being both theoretical and practical, of being both
mhm.
logical and empirical. And I know you and I would agree on all of that. And I thought that that was a really important emphasis to thinking about, well, what is philosophy? That philosophy is something that you do.
Yeah, no, and I will definitely credit that same piece. Thank you for sharing. It helped me in preparation, and it really even helped clarify the how piece of my definition at, that philosophy is a method of thinking. And I didn't use the term epistemology, just, knowing that our audience may not be familiar with that. It is the branch that deals with knowledge formation and how we prove it, how we know what we know. Um, but that is essentially what I was getting at in my answer to the
Mhm,
how. And so in that sense, the what and the how, that was why, to me, on this question especially, they are kind of indistinguishable, or at least not indistinguishable, but that's the wrong word, but um, inseparable.
mhm,
So, and I really liked his piece for because of its focus on that. To your point, even going back to the point about it is, each person comes to their own philosophy, has to go through their own process, um, rather than everyone arrives at the same answer. But he did, I think, advocate for everyone applying a same method, or at least a
mhm,
same way of thinking. So that in that sense, that was what I was trying to articulate. And I think, to me at least, it is a key part of what does being philosophical mean.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's true. Well, and then should we get to the next piece that I wanted to reference as
Yep,
well?
go for it.
Yeah, and so the next piece I want to reference almost perhaps seemingly contradicts what I just said, but I don't think it does, and I think it's an important one to draw out. And so this actually came from Ayn Rand's answer. She has a famous essay, which is actually based on a talk that she gave in the mid 70s. From my understanding, she was invited to give this address to the graduates of West Point, and she titled her presentation "Philosophy: Who Needs It?" And it was essentially bringing up this question of, what is philosophy and why do we need it? Who needs it? And her answer was ultimately that everyone needs it, kind of in line with what it is that you said, Chris. And if we're going to answer, why is it that everyone needs philosophy? Her answer is because essentially everyone has a philosophy, and her point being though that everyone has an implicit philosophy, and that I think is the crucial distinction here. Um, that I think an implicit philosophy is more like a noun. It's something that you have, and that everyone
Mm,
does have one, but not everyone takes the next step to actually do philosophy in an explicit
mm,
way. I think that is the distinction.
yeah.
And the thing that I think more people ought to do. But let's take a moment to even just sort of explore. Like, I think she really captures something that is true and important and ought to be recognized, that everyone does have an implicit philosophy. And I'll share, like, this is definitely something I see in my work as a coach. This comes out all the time. So in coaching, there's sort of a model of thinking about human activity that the results, that the outcomes that you get in your life are based on your actions, and your actions are based on your feelings, and your feelings ultimately are based on your beliefs and your thinking. And it's true that all of us, by the time we get to be, say, adolescents, but even before that, I mean, even by time we're probably 4 or 5 year old children, we start to develop beliefs about the world, even if they're not beliefs that we ever try to verbalize. They're just sort of there, just sort of, implicit essentially within our subconscious, our ideas about how the world works, who we are, what's important, what matters, like what can we actually do in this world. And that we
Hmm.
all sort of have these answers, and that if we don't actually examine them, if we don't do what Socrates perhaps suggests, and live the examined life, and examine explicitly what these implicit beliefs are, that there's so much that we are missing in life. So I think, it's important, I think, to recognize that just given our nature as conceptual beings, we all have an implicit philosophy. And what I think that means is that we all then ought to do the work of philosophy.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I would say it ties back to that was essentially what I was trying to get at with my what, in particular, the first of the three parts of the what, about it being the foundational base of knowledge is, and this is, I think, what Ayn Rand beautifully illustrates in that wonderful essay, Philosophy Who Needs It, is this fact that, like, by nature of being conceptual beings who have to use our minds, we can't move through the world and make sense of it without at least having an implicit answer to some of these questions. Oh, is the universe knowable and dependable so that I know each day when I wake up the sun's going to rise and I can go about, hunting or foraging and survive for the next day and the next day? Or is it totally random and is it going to change from day to day? Like, those are all things that pretty much every human being has, at least implicitly or unconsciously in their mind as a view of the world. Whichever way they come down on it, they have it. But what's important, and what I love also about that essay that she advocates for, is making it explicit, which in our terms here is what we're calling doing philosophy or being philosophical, is making that explicit. And then I'll just tie it back to me, this then connects to both the third prong of my what definition, that it's your guide to your life, and then my answer to the why it matters, which is kind of like Ayn Rand's, point of her essay, Philosophy Who Needs It, is that by the more conscious we make those philosophical premises that we're operating under, and then hopefully work through the philosophical method of thinking to make those conscious premises accurate, and or at least, in harmony with our goals and values, then the more apt we are to achieve happiness, to achieve flourishing, and to live the good life. So, as I'm glad you referenced the probably the most famous phrase in philosophy, and probably the most famous philosopher, because he was kind of the first philosopher, Socrates from ancient Greece,
Mhm.
who famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." To me, my answer to that, and why philosophy matters for everybody, everywhere, always, is that, but the philosophical life is worth all of the universe's secrets. So, that would be kind of my retort or my add on to Socrates' famous dictum.
Well, and I love that you even take Socrates and add on to him, because I would say this then is the other sort of important thing I think to draw out. And unfortunately, the thing that I think is missing from Ayn Rand's approach, and I mean, I suppose this is just kind of what's becoming, I feel like, my general approach to Ayn Rand, that I think there's so much that she does get right, or important truths that she gets, and then stuff that she just misses. And one of the things that always saddens me about that particular essay or particular speech, by the time she ends it, she suggests that that if these West Point graduates start asking themselves philosophical questions, that they will just like come to accept her philosophy. And unfortunately, I don't think like that's not really how philosophy works. That, like, to your point, that there are truths that are out there that are shared, but that the worst thing to do is to just sort of find a guru and accept their ideas, accept their frameworks, accept their rubrics. And here I think actually Abraham Maslow, who's someone I know I'm going to be talking about a lot. You actually already referenced Maslow and his concepts of self-actualization. But here I think he had a really brilliant observation that gets to the heart of this. So when he is looking at the people that he identified as those who attained self-actualization, he noted that they all had so many traits and characteristics in common, and that they all were able to get to truth. But significantly, they all got to that truth in their own way and in their own words. And so he makes this point that the self actualizers never just sort of accept the existing rubrics and frameworks of what's out there. And this meshes exactly with my own observations of how I think the most flourishing people and the most philosophical people actually operate. That, to extent we are social beings, that there are people who have done this work before us and that there are things to learn. But what I found that the best approach is to actually try to, I like to say, mine the gold from multiple different sources. And this is what Maslow himself did, that he recognized that there were important truths in the psychoanalytic theory of psychology, and there were important truths in the behavioristic approach to psychology, and that none of them had the full picture. And then he was, self-actualization was not a term he invented. He took it from another philosopher, Goldstein, but then gave it his own definition. And so in essence, he's kind of showing us exactly what you do. And hopefully I'm modeling this here too, by bringing in these different sources and saying, like, look, there are
Yeah.
important truths that we can grasp from all of these brilliant people who've come before us, and that we're all on this path to truth. But it is ultimately up to you to try to put this into your own words and to put it into your own framework, your own system, your own rubric, and to also recognize that that's something that ought to evolve and grow over time. So even what you did to open this up for us, I love that, you decided to use the heuristic of the five W's and the how, and that it's, a wonderful jumping off point. And that what I hope that you'll even show to us is like how much of this will change, and that you'll probably even make some refinements to it over time, just as you go through life and
Oh,
start thinking about
definitely.
this question more. And this, I
Totally.
guess, gets to my point of the important thing to mention, that I think the way in which philosophy is organic in that way. And again, sadly, I think this is a place that's the part about Ayn Rand that most saddens me. Like, I think, I think that she kind of sadly becomes what I like to call zombie Ayn Rand at some point after Atlas Shrugged, that she kind of stopped actually trying to evolve and develop and grow her work and her ideas. It's a whole other conversation we could have. And
We can
but
put a
that
pin in that one.
we could put a pin in that one, exactly. If people want to know what I mean by zombie Ayn Rand, if that's of interest. But what I hope for us and for our listeners is that, and for myself and what I try to do, and what I think we're trying to model here, is more this approach of, to your point, of always being curious, of always asking questions, of always trying to make it better. And to the extent that there are truths, those are not going to change, but there's ways that they can, of course, become more refined, more developed, more clear, and hopefully maybe even more concise, which is obviously something that I need to always be
That we're
working
all
on, it
working. Oh,
seems.
everyone. I mean, it's communicate. This is why communication as a skill is a critical one, but it is a skill, meaning it has to be learned, just like any other skill or knowledge base. So I totally appreciate that, and um, yeah, no, thank you for that. I think this is a good segue into, or this raises an important question that it always comes up of where does religion fit into this, or
Hmm.
how does philosophy how is it similar and or different from religion? Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people, maybe even most people, kind of see the two as synonymous and or religion as a substitute for it, or and that may even be why philosophy, at least in my own experience, seems to be somewhat of a alien concept to a lot of human beings, or at least one that is kind of detached and aloof from them, an ivory tower kind of purview and project, but not one of relevance. Whereas obviously the vast majority of humanity is religious. So clearly that is serving some function. So maybe, we can just even look at, are they synonymous, is it the same function? And so for this I also availed myself of AI, and I use ChatGPT. We're doing our own experiment, Joy and I, to kind of trial the two, compare and contrast the results from the two models, and two companies. But I liked what it gave because I just gave it a simple prompt of this question of what is the similarities and differences between philosophy and religion, and I thought it gave a really good, simple answer. So I'll just quickly review it. Um, it said, philosophy and religion both seek to answer fundamental questions about existence, morality, knowledge, and the nature of reality. However, they approach these questions in different ways. And then it just lists, I won't read the full scope, but I'll at least give the lists. It gives a list of 5 key similarities and then 5 key differences. The similarities it noted are both explore ultimate questions, as we just noted, Both use reason and argumentation, employing logical reasoning, critical thinking, structured arguments. I found that one interesting, but I definitely see it. Um,
Maybe it
both
depends on the religion too, but
Exact
yes.
well, exactly. So that's why there's an asterisk there in my
Mhm.
own view, but we'll go with it.
But definitely some religions do.
Yeah, exactly, no doubt. Both have moral and ethical frameworks. Both have influence on society and culture, shaping legal systems, social values, and cultural norms. And both have different schools of thought and diversity of thought, different philosophies, different religions and sects, etc. So those were, at least from ChatGPT's perspective, the five key similarities between the two. And then the five key differences are the, the first being the foundational basis that philosophy relies on reason, logic, and empirical evidence, whereas religion often incorporates faith, divine revelation, and sacred texts. Their epistemology, meaning their source of knowledge, philosophy seeking, again, through reason, observation, and debate, its answers, whereas religion appeals to divine wisdom, scriptures, and spiritual experiences. Thirdly, the concept of the divine. Philosophy really doesn't have that, whereas religion does. The fourth is flexibility and authority. Philosophy evolves as new arguments emerge. It has no absolute authority, which I think goes great to your point about constantly evolving and not just taking someone else, some guru's views, but really having to come to your own. Whereas religion often relies on fixed doctrines, traditions, and religious authorities. And then the last one is personal versus communal practice, which I found was actually that philosophy is largely an individual intellectual pursuit, whereas religion involves communal worship, rituals, and collective beliefs.
And perhaps one of the interesting ways in which we are trying to evolve philosophy, even in what our project is.
Yeah, exactly. That we are trying to make it, frankly, a more communal experience and a more accessible experience. Again, it's for everyone,
Mhm.
everywhere, all the time. I feel like it's like that movie that came out, Everywhere, Everything All at Once, Everything Everywhere
Yes.
All at Once or
Yes.
something that won all the Oscars a couple of years ago. And I feel like that's the same thing here. So, anyways, I thought that was really helpful and clarifying, and hopefully, um, since this is a key question, others who are listening in or watching find that helpful. Do you want to add anything to this topic?
I think it just sets us up for the great segue of then, what exactly do we mean by philosophical liberalism, and
Hmm.
why these concepts are connected in our view, and to stress this idea that we've put together a framework of philosophical liberalism that could encompass people of a variety of religious backgrounds. Like to the extent that you have your own philosophy, if someone is on a path that is a religious path, that can fall under the rubric of, the umbrella of that we put together of what we mean by philosophical liberalism, and we've done that purposefully and intentionally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's not even by design or as a means to, kind of be big tent, but I think it really is, it speaks to um, kind of what we're all about and what the essence of philosophical liberalism is. I mean, to go back to the prior episode where we defined it, um, you know, it's a set of political moral ideas to maximize human freedom, flourishing, and greatness. From my perspective, anybody who is aiming towards freedom, flourishing, and greatness, however they come to it, regardless of kind of their religious philosophy or practice, we can be united in that sense. So it's not, this maybe to your point is where there is scope for people to come at it differently, but in the, at least the political moral dimension that 1776 forward that we're focused on advancing with the movement for philosophical liberalism, that is kind of a set of principles and values that we can all unite on.
Mm. Yeah. And that's sort of our point in kind of putting this together, that with philosophical liberalism, that we wanted to put forward certain key philosophical ideas, and perhaps maybe we can even talk about here, why it's, we made the decision to refer to this as philosophical liberalism with a capital P and a capital L, and we have specific ideas that we are putting forward, um, that contrast it with just sort of a wider version of, lowercase p and l philosophical liberalism,
That's
but
right.
that part of our design was to capitalize on key truths, key deep answers, views about the nature of humanity, about how knowledge and thinking work, epistemology, ideas about values and virtues that commonly fall under morality, and then obviously talking about political issues that generally fall under a branch of political philosophy, that we have certain answers to that, but that we've put together a system that's meant to be an umbrella that can encompass everyone to bring their own unique philosophies to it. So
Yeah.
the whole point is
And
just to articulate a common set of philosophical ideas that underpin freedom, flourishing, greatness, so that we can actually create a community around this while allowing for maximum individuality.
I love that. See, we're teasing out and refining our own articulation of this as we go along, even real
Yes.
time here in this. The way I would kind of think of it is we are we're pulling out or emphasizing certain philosophical principles and ideas that we find most relevant and important for building a free society that will maximize human flourishing and greatness. So in that sense, it's not, as we said in the last discussion, it's not a comprehensive system. It's certainly not a closed system. It's certainly not one that purports to have the answers to all of life's big questions. But at least we've picked out the ones that we find of significance for this project of advancing a more liberal, free society. And then critically, our other key point here is our vision for that liberal society really is just a means to the greater end of a flourishing society that encourages and enables maximum number of humans to achieve their full great potential.
Beautifully
And from
said.
my perspective, that is a universal project in a sense that is not dependent on one's the totality of the rest of one's individual philosophy or religious beliefs.
Wonderful. So moving into some of the other key themes that we wanted to make sure to emphasize here and talking about what we mean by philosophical liberalism.
Sure. I mean, I think we kind of touched on most of them already, but to me, just kind of to bring it full circle, to me, some of the key themes are just emphasizing yet again that it is for everyone, everywhere, always, that because emphasizing really that how aspect of it, and then in the what, that's the guide to your life, that by being more conscious about thinking through your own answers to all of these great questions and then trying to tie them all together to what it is you want out of your life and how to achieve your goals and happiness, that is personally, I can't think of a better project to be engaged in one's life that gives greater meaning and purpose to life. I know it certainly has for my life, for my own life, and that's even why I'm passionate about this project and always have been passionate about ideas, is I see the direct connection and how being consciously mindful and thoughtful and constantly asking questions about these big meta level questions and then tying it back to even my day-to-day life problems of, oh, how do I want to be in the workplace? How do I want to show up in my relationships with those I care about? How do I want to be honest and act with integrity and consistency in everything I do? Like, I've seen that connection and how it's fueled my own success and happiness, or even when I've made mistakes and had failures, how it's helped me resolve them easier. It's really just given me the confidence and clarity to go through go through life, whatever it throws at me. And I really can't stress enough or advocate how powerful I think that is, that method of thinking and approaching life is to anybody's life. It really is for everyone, and it's certainly not an ivory tower preserve.
Tying it back to Socrates, it's for everyone in the marketplace to be asking themselves these questions and figuring out how to live better lives, ones that help you realize your unique potential as an individual, as well as your potential that you share in common with all humans. Exactly.
Mhm. Any other themes that you wanted to pull out or emphasize?
I think here we could segue to our call to action.
Okay, great. Well, why
Unless there was
don't
something
you?
else you wanted to say.
No, let's go. Let us know what is the call today.
Well, this call to action really was a call to the action aspect of philosophy, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the idea of virtues. To me, that really is where you could say the rubber meets the road of how you're thinking about the big questions of what is the nature of the world, what matters, how do I know it, what is right and wrong, who should I be, comes out in your virtues. And it's interesting because I think you and I would agree that there are a plethora of virtues that one could select from, all of which would be true. But here's one of the interesting ways in which I think people are truly individual. That so you know that in our project we identified 11 virtues that we see as being critical and core to liberalism specifically, but we obviously don't think that it exhausts all of the virtues that are out there. So I thought one of the interesting things that we could do even now, for this particular session and thinking about how you take your own implicit philosophy and make it explicit, is to ask everyone to think about and come up with what they would say would be their own personal top three virtues. And it's really interesting because I would assume that with all the virtues out there, probably no two people have the exact same three virtues in the exact order and using the exact words. And even if they did, they probably actually express them in different ways. So, this is just sort of another one of the ways in which I think we are all on our own philosophical journeys. So, hopefully, it emphasizes that point. And something I thought you could do is that we could each do this exercise ourselves and share it separately. So, I don't know if you want to articulate the idea again for people, the idea of the pins, what we're going to do with the pins, and um, maybe
Yeah,
share your thoughts
certainly.
about the exercise.
Yeah, certainly. Well, and just to go back, for everyone out there, so I never want to assume a certain starting point of knowledge, but virtues are just the qualities of character and the actions one takes to achieve the values or goals that matter to you in your life. So if you go back to our statement, that the 11 virtues that Joya referenced, just to even give some concrete examples of what some of them are, in our case, the ones we pulled out of significance in our view for liberalism were responsibility, curiosity, critical thinking, purpose, engagement, adaptability, integrity, effective communication, toleration, justice, and generosity. And we're going to go through each of those in depth because, as Joya said, virtues really are, and why we even emphasize so much of this moral aspect in our statement and vision, is because virtues really are kind of the bridge between the thought of the philosophical and then the action of kind of liberalism, building that free society that enables us all to thrive and achieve our highest potential. So from that perspective, we're going to do a deep dive on those. So that those were just examples, but as Joy also noted, there's innumerable other virtues out there. So just again, to reiterate, our call to action is think through your own list, whatever it is, and what the three most important ones to you are in living your own life. And then we will come back to this, and Joy and I will both each answer it in our pin section, which is we're going to put a pin in it, and then we'll find another way for topics that are ancillary or derivative for our main TPL discussion. We will find a way to come back to them and answer them in a different forum, whether it's a written post on our Substack, or another quick video, and then it might even just be Joya and I individually answering that. In this case, it will be. But that's what the pins corner is going to be. So you're going to hear us reference that probably a lot from here on out in each subsequent session whenever something comes up that we want to come back to, but set aside for our main discussion time.
And I think eventually it will be just for paid subscribers whenever we figure out exactly what we're going to do with Substack and figuring out how to monetize our efforts here.
Yes, exactly. So that's one little plug for becoming a paid subscriber, or at least what is it, pledging to be once we turn that on.
Mhm.
So as always, be sure to follow us on Substack or all of our social media. We're on all the major platforms: Facebook, X, and Instagram, and YouTube as well, where these videos also are embedded. And I think that completes our discussion for this one. And as a preview for the next philosophical liberal, what is going to be our next question?
It's going to be, perhaps no surprise here, what is liberalism?
Yep.
And I want to tease too that on the virtue list, only one of my three virtues is actually one of the 11 that are under our philosophical liberalism system. So I'm
Oh,
going to be really curious.
interesting.
I'm curious to hear what yours are, because even thinking about it, like maybe I have some ideas, but I don't know exactly what you're going to say, and I'm definitely curious to hear from all our viewers and listeners and readers as well.
Yeah, so send us a DM through Substack, or any of our other platforms. Reply via the email blast that goes out on this episode, or any other way you want to contact us. We'd love to hear your views. So share your views, please, on what your three top virtues are. And otherwise, until then, we'll see you in 2 weeks to answer the question of what is liberalism.
See you then.
See you then.